So you're looking to get smart, fast, right, to kind of cut through the noise and really understand what matters.
That's our sweet spot, definitely.
Today, we're diving into work in progress, or WIP. We've got a fascinating sort of two-pronged approach here.
All right, two different angles on it.
First, we'll dissect the financial and operational core, the business side, with insights from Investopedia.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts.
Then we'll broaden things out a bit, inspired by Works in Progress magazine, which is, well, it's a publication exploring ongoing development across a surprisingly diverse range of fields.
Really diverse, yeah. Not what you might expect.
Exactly. So our mission is nail down what WIP means in business and explore how this whole concept of work in progress resonates, in the wider world.
Sounds good. And the Investopedia piece, it gives us the essential groundwork, especially, like you said, from that financial lens.
Okay, so how do they define it? Simply put.
Well, simply put, work in progress is about those goods currently moving through the production process. They're beyond raw materials, but not yet the finished article ready for sale.
So stuff on the assembly line, basically.
Pretty much. Think of it as the value tied up in those partially completed items on the factory floor.
Okay, let's get specific then. Investopedia says WIP includes all the costs sunk in so far.
The raw materials used, the labor applied, and importantly, the overhead expenses allocated to that production. Keeping the lights on, factory rent, that sort of thing.
And this isn't just some internal tracking thing. It hits the books.
Oh, absolutely. WIP directly impacts their inventory asset valuation right there on the balance sheet. It's a component of inventory.
Got it. So it's a snapshot of the economic value currently sitting in those unfinished products.
Yeah.
At a specific point in time, right?
Exactly. And the article also clarifies the boundaries, which is helpful. WIP doesn't include untouched raw materials sitting in the warehouse.
Okay. Stuff not yet in production.
Right. Nor does it cover finished goods that are just waiting to be shipped or sold.
So WIP is really that crucial middle ground, the in-process stage.
Perfectly put. It's that middle ground.
Now, here's something that jumped out at me. Investopedia highlights this push to minimize WIP inventory before reporting periods. Why is that? What's the strategy?
Good question. There are a couple of key drivers, really.
Okay.
For one, actually assessing the completion stage of these in-process goods. Well, it can be pretty subjective.
How done is done.
Exactly. Yeah. How do you precisely quantify the labor or the allocated overhead for something only partly assembled? This uncertainty, this subjectivity in WIP valuation, it can significantly impact a company's reported profits.
And their tax liabilities too, I bet.
Definitely. So it becomes a critical area for scrutiny. Investors, auditors, they pay attention to this.
Okay, so accuracy and avoiding subjectivity. What else?
The second driver is more operational, really. Holding on to large amounts of WIP, well, it can inflate storage costs, takes up space, and maybe more importantly, it increases the risk that those partially finished items become outdated or, obsolete before they're even completed.
Right. Market changes, tech changes.
Precisely. So minimizing WIP is about efficiency, financial accuracy, and reducing that risk of obsolescence and waste.
That makes perfect sense. It's like having a cake halfway baked. You've got ingredients and effort in, but it's not saleable yet, and it's tying up the oven.
Great analogy.
Yeah.
Now, the article also talks about WIP describing the flow of manufacturing costs.
Right. Can you walk us through that maybe with an example?
Sure. Let's imagine a simple factory making, say, plastic combs.
Okay, combs.
Raw plastic comes in. That's your initial material cost. Workers operate the molding machines. That's labor. Electricity for the machines, rent for the factory space, those are overheads.
Got it.
Initially, all these costs, as they're incurred in making the combs, they accumulate in the WIP account.
Okay, it's like a holding account.
Exactly. Then, as the combs are fully manufactured finished, these accumulated costs are transferred out of WIP and into the finished goods inventory account.
So value moves from in process to ready to sell.
Right. And the final step, when those completed combs are actually sold, those costs move again. This time from finished goods to what's called the cost of goods sold, or COGS.
Which is matched against the revenue from the sale.
Precisely. That's the direct cost of the goods that were actually sold. So WIP acts as this temporary reservoir for all the production expenses while items are still being made.
So the key moment for an item to become WIP is when labor has been applied, but it's not yet that final marketable thing.
That's the essence of it. And, the article also brings up a really important point for anyone comparing company financials.
What's that?
accounting for WIP isn't completely uniform across the board.
Ah, different methods.
Yeah. Companies can use different ways to allocate those overhead costs we mentioned. Maybe one company bases it on direct labor hours, another uses machine hours used in production.
So the way they calculate that overhead portion of WIP can vary.
Exactly. And because of that, directly comparing WIP figures between different companies, even if they're in the same industry.
Well, it might not always be an apples-to-apples comparison. You have to be careful.
That's a really vital piece of context for anyone digging into financial statements anyway. It's a reminder that, the devil's often in the accounting details.
It often is.
Speaking of details, when it comes to figuring out that percentage of completion for WIP, how do accountants typically do that? What methods are used?
Well, Investopedia notes that accountants often look at the proportion of the total expected costs that have been incurred so far across all three categories: raw materials, labor, and overhead.
So if half the total expected cost is spent, it's maybe 50% complete for accounting? Roughly.
That's the kind of logic, yes.
Yeah.
Though it can get more complex. And interestingly, they point out that raw material costs are usually among the first ones to hit the WIP account, naturally.
Because you need the materials before you can apply labor or overhead.
Which kind of leads us to process costing versus job costing. The article mentions these. They're different accounting methods tied to how things are made, correct?
Precisely. Process costing is what you'd use for, say, our comb factory producing large volumes of identical homogeneous products. Costs are tracked as items move through different production stages or departments.
Okay, mass production.
Yeah. Job costing, on the other hand, is for unique projects or specific customer orders. Think of maybe a construction company like XYZ Roofing that Investopedia mentions.
Right, they bid on individual jobs.
Exactly. Each roof is a unique job, so they track the specific material cost, labor hours, and overhead applied to that particular roof. The accounting system has to mirror the nature of the work.
Makes sense. Tailored versus mass market.
Pretty much.
Now, I noticed the article, and we've been doing it too, uses work in progress and work in process almost interchangeably. Is there actually any difference we should worry about?
For most practical purposes, they really mean the same thing, those partially completed goods. However, Investopedia does mention a potential subtle nuance you might encounter sometimes.
Oh.
Some people might theoretically reserve work in process for items with shorter production cycles, like typical manufacturing, think assembly lines.
Right, things moving quickly through a process.
Yeah. And then work in progress might be used more for longer-term projects, things like consulting engagements or large construction projects that are definitely in progress for a while.
Ah, I see. Duration might be a factor for some.
It might be, but honestly, the key takeaway here is that this isn't a strict, universally applied distinction. You'll see both terms used for the same thing very often. Don't get too hung up on it.
Okay, good to know. So whether it's progress or process, we're fundamentally talking about that in-between stage.
Yeah.
Let's just really solidify the core difference between WIP and finished goods. It seems obvious, but the article points out this layer of relativity that's quite interesting.
Yeah, the fundamental difference really just boils down to saleability, right? Is the product ready for sale or not?
Simple enough.
WIP is still being worked on. Finished goods are complete from the manufacturer's perspective and ready to be sold. However, like you said, the classifications themselves, WIP, finished goods, even raw materials, they're relative terms, not absolute categories.
And the plywood example they used makes this super clear.
It really does. For a lumber mill, that big sheet of plywood, that's their finished good. Job done, ready to sell.
Right.
But then a cabinet maker buys that exact same sheet of plywood. For them, it's just raw material. It's the start of their process.
Okay. So it completely depends on who you are and what your business does.
Exactly. The classification hinges entirely on where that item sits within a specific company's overall inventory lifecycle. It's all about perspective and the business model.
Okay, so let's quickly summarize the accounting view then. WIP means the cost tied up in partially completed goods. It's inventory being worked on.
Yep. It includes the accumulated overhead, raw materials used so far, and the labor costs applied at whatever stage of production it's in.
And crucially, it's shown as a current asset on the balance sheet, a type of inventory.
That sums it up perfectly. And as Investopedia illustrated with that construction company example, calculating the value of WIP often involves estimating that percentage of completion.
Based on costs incurred, usually.
Right, like billing when a project is, say, 25% complete, then again at 50%, it's a practical way to account for and recognize the value of that work while it's still in progress.
All right, fantastic. I feel like we've really built a strong understanding of work in progress in that business, finance, accounting world, thanks to Investopedia.
Yeah, it provides a solid foundation.
Okay, so now let's pivot. Let's talk about our second source of inspiration, Works in Progress magazine. Now, you really have to picture this magazine, listener. It is not your typical business journal.
Not at all.
Flipping through their articles, I mean, you find just this incredibly diverse collection. You might get deep dives into the history of New York City's steam infrastructure.
Fascinating stuff.
Right next to the science behind lab-grown diamonds. Explorations into why we have housing shortages, even thoughtful pieces on, like, the future of silk production. It's incredibly eclectic.
And tackled with real intellectual curiosity, you can tell.
Definitely. So what's particularly interesting here is how the magazine's title, Works in Progress, takes that core concept we've just spent time dissecting something in development, not yet finalized.
And applies it to this much, much wider spectrum of subjects. It's a great name for it.
It really is. While Investopedia grounded us in the tangible financial aspects of unfinished goods, the magazine's title suggests that, well, numerous facets of our world, our knowledge, our society, they're perpetually evolving, constantly in a state of work in progress.
That's a really neat connection. Does the magazine ever sort of explicitly explore how the very definition of progress itself might be a work in progress across these different fields?
That's a fantastic question, and I think you see it reflected implicitly in the sheer range of topics they cover. An exploration of new fertility technologies. Well, that's clearly a work in progress in science, but also in social norms and ethics, isn't it?
Absolutely. The implications are still unfolding.
Or an analysis of why prediction markets haven't quite taken off as expected. That's a work in progress in understanding maybe human behavior and market dynamics.
Yeah, or regulatory hurdles, maybe.
Could be. Even a piece on how cities develop their infrastructure over time. That's a constant work in progress in urban planning, engineering, politics.
So the magazine covers such diverse areas. Does this suggest that the work in progress in, say, scientific discovery faces similar kinds of challenges or maybe requires similar approaches to the work in progress of urban development, or they're just fundamentally different beasts?
That's what it makes you ponder, right? It prompts us to consider that. Just like a company has to diligently track its WIP inventory for financial reasons, researchers, innovators, policymakers, even entire societies are constantly observing and analyzing these ongoing works in progress in their own domains.
Yeah, you're always dealing with challenges to overcome, new innovations popping up, continuous development, and the ultimate outcome is often, well, uncertain, still being shaped.
Exactly.
Right.
So we see how crucial it is for businesses to understand and manage their work in progress in that specific financial sense we discussed.
Absolutely critical for them.
But the term itself, the idea, has this much broader resonance, and that's something that a publication like Works in Progress magazine really brings to light, just by existing and covering what it covers.
It's like the articles themselves feel like progress reports, in a way.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. They aren't presented as, like, the final definitive word on a topic.
No, more like an insightful snapshot of where things currently stand, maybe some history, and perhaps some potential future directions or open questions.
Right. They represent a stage in the unfolding of an idea or a technology or a societal issue. Much like WIP inventory signifies a stage in the creation of a physical product.
That's a really powerful analogy. It encourages us, the readers, to view the world not as this static collection of finished products or settled debates.
Definitely not settled debates.
Right. But more as a dynamic landscape of ongoing projects, ongoing innovations, constant transformations. It's a good reminder that progress is rarely, if ever, a straight line.
And that so much of what we encounter every day is in fact still a work in progress.
Yeah, still unfolding.
So, okay, let's try and bring this all together. We've seen how WIP is this fundamental concept for understanding a company's financial health, the efficiency of its production cycle.
Right, recognizing the value and the costs tied up in goods that are still literally in the making.
And we've also explored how this idea of works in progress, kind of sparked by that really varied magazine, extends far beyond the balance sheet. It illuminates the continuous nature of development, of change, in countless aspects of our world.
And we shouldn't forget that relative nature we discussed with the plywood example. That distinction between WIP and finished goods, it isn't always this super clear-cut line, depends heavily on context, on perspective.
It really does, which, makes you think. Considering the precision, the metrics businesses use to track their works in progress, What other works in progress? Maybe personal goals, societal shifts we're seeing, scientific explorations. What other ones are you, listener, currently observing or maybe even actively engaged in?
Yeah, and what metrics could you even use to gauge their progress? They might be less quantifiable than dollars and cents, right?
For sure. Much less tangible sometimes. But it's still worth considering, isn't it?
Hmm.
How this concept of WIP, both in its concrete business sense and its more abstract metaphorical sense, how does it apply to the various endeavors and evolutions unfolding in your own life and just the world around you?
Definitely some food for thought there. What's currently in progress for you?